Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Natasha Kanu had always believed in the power of hard work. From the moment she stepped into adulthood, she understood that nothing in life was handed to anyone on a silver platter. She was raised in Orizu, a bustling town known for its vibrant marketplace and resilient people. Her mother, a seamstress, and her father, a retired teacher, instilled in her the values of diligence, humility, and perseverance. Natasha was not just intelligent, she was exceptionally brilliant. From an early age, she excelled in school, always at the top of her class, winning numerous academic awards. Despite coming from a modest background, she never let that deter her dreams. While other girls in her neighborhood focused on finding wealthy suitors, Natasha buried herself in books, determined to carve a name for herself. She earned a scholarship to study business administration at Onitaba University, where she quickly became known for her sharp mind and relentless ambition. Professors admired her, and peers envied her ability to grasp complex subjects effortlessly. But despite her brilliance, she remained humble. She tutored struggling students for free, volunteered at the library, and never hesitated to help others. It was at Onitaba University that she met Graham Obinna. He was charming, confident, and had an effortless way of making people feel comfortable around him. Unlike Natasha, who was always calculating her next move, Graham lived in the moment. He studied economics but was not particularly studious. He had an easygoing nature that made people gravitate toward him. They met at a career seminar during their second year when Graham had mistakenly taken Natasha's notebook, thinking it was his. When he returned it, flashing his signature smile, Natasha had merely nodded, unimpressed. "You don't smile much, do you?" Graham had teased. "I smile when there's a reason to," Natasha had replied. That should have been the end of their interaction, but Graham had been intrigued. He pursued her with an unrelenting charm, always finding excuses to strike up conversations. At first, Natasha saw him as a distraction, but over time she found herself enjoying their debates about business, life, and success. Unlike the other students who only saw her as the serious, no-nonsense girl, Graham saw the warmth beneath her exterior. He made her laugh, he challenged her. He softened the edges she had built around herself. By the time they graduated, they were inseparable. Graham had grand ambitions. He spoke of building a financial empire, of making a name for himself in the corporate world. Natasha, on the other hand, had already secured a position at a prestigious firm in Umunaka, a city known for its booming economy. She was immediately recognized for her diligence and strategic thinking, rising quickly in the ranks. Their love story was one of mutual dreams and promises. When Graham proposed to her in a quiet park beneath the shade of a large udala tree, Natasha didn't hesitate. She loved him, not because of his wealth, he had none, but because she believed in him. She believed in his dreams, in the fire he carried inside him. They had a modest wedding in Umunaka, attended by family and close friends. Natasha wore a simple but elegant white gown, her natural beauty shining through. Graham looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They promised to build a future together, to support each other no matter what. For the first 2 years of their marriage, things were beautiful. Natasha excelled at work, earning promotions faster than anyone expected. Graham, too, had secured a job at a private financial firm, and though it was not exactly what he had envisioned, it gave him a sense of purpose. They lived in a comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood, sharing responsibilities and supporting each other's goals. Natasha never made Graham feel less of a man just because she earned more. If anything, she respected him deeply. She encouraged him, reassured him that his big break would come. She was a woman who knew the value of patience and endurance. But life had its own plans. One morning, Graham came home looking unusually quiet. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. His shoulders slumped in a way Natasha had never seen before. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. He hesitated before meeting her eyes. "I lost my job today." Natasha felt heart sink. "What happened?" "The company downsized. I was one of the unlucky ones." Natasha reached for his hands, squeezing them gently. "It's okay, Graham, you'll find something else. You're talented, intelligent." "Am I?" he interrupted, his voice laced with frustration. "Because if I was, I wouldn't be jobless right now." She saw the pain in his eyes, the bruised ego, the doubt creeping in. She knew Graham was struggling, not just financially, but emotionally. Society had always taught men to be providers, to measure their worth by their ability to take care of their families. Losing his job had shaken his confidence. "We'll get through this," she assured him. "You are not alone in this, Graham. I will handle things for now. Just take your time and find something else." At first, Graham resisted, insisting he would find another job within weeks. Natasha supported him, sending his resume to different firms, helping him with applications. But weeks turned into months and no job offer came. The financial weight slowly shifted entirely onto Natasha's shoulders. She paid the rent, the bills, the groceries. She even gave Graham an allowance to ensure he still had something for himself. She never made him feel like a burden, never once threw his situation in his face. She continued treating him with love, respect, and dignity. But as time passed, things started to change. Graham's once lively demeanor became dull. He stopped applying for jobs with the same enthusiasm. He grew comfortable with Natasha handling everything. At first, she dismissed it, thinking he just needed time to adjust. But then something strange happened. His mother and siblings, who had previously been distant, suddenly started calling more often. They spoke with excitement about how proud they were of him, how he was taking care of his home like a real man. And Natasha, always the observant one, began to feel a cold, uneasy sensation creeping into her heart. Something was not right, and she was about to find out exactly why. Natasha Kanu had always been a woman of strength. She carried responsibilities on her shoulders with grace, never once allowing the weight of them to break her spirit. When Graham lost his job, she stepped up without hesitation, ensuring that their home remained as peaceful and comfortable as ever. She took charge of everything. The rent, the electricity bills, the internet subscription, the groceries, even the small luxuries that made life enjoyable. She handled them all. Not once did she sigh in frustration or complain about how much she was doing. She reassured Graham over and over again that this was temporary, that he would find something soon, and until then she would carry the load for both of them. Every month, Natasha set aside money for his mother and siblings. She did it out of love, out of respect for the family she had married into. Graham had always spoken about how much his mother had sacrificed for him growing up, how she had worked tirelessly to put food on their table after his father passed away. Natasha, being the generous person she was, believed it was only right to show appreciation. So month after month, she sent them money, ensuring they were comfortable. If his younger brother needed new school books, she sent it. If his sister needed something for her small business, she provided it. It never crossed her mind that it should be Graham's responsibility. After all, they were one, his family was hers, and as long as she had the means, she saw no reason not to help. She thought she was simply fulfilling her role as a good wife. What she did not know was that her kindness was slowly fueling a dangerous illusion. Graham never once corrected the misconception his family had. They assumed he was the one taking care of them, that despite his job loss, he had found a way to still provide. Whenever they called to express gratitude, it was to him. "Graham, my son, you are truly a blessing," his mother often said over the phone. "Not many men would still think of their family the way you do. May God continue to lift you." "Brother Graham, you are a real man," his younger brother would add. "The way you handle things, I just pray to be half the man you are someday." His sister would giggle in admiration. "Your wife is so lucky. You take care of your home, take care of us. I hope my future husband will be like you." Graham never corrected them, never told them that it was Natasha all along, that the money they were praising him for came from her sweat, her long hours at work, her sacrifices. Instead, he absorbed it like a sponge, soaking in their admiration, enjoying the validation that came with being perceived as the perfect son, the perfect brother. At first, Natasha saw nothing wrong with it. She was happy that Graham's family appreciated him. She loved him, and if this misunderstanding made him feel better about himself during this difficult period, then what harm could it possibly do? She told herself it was harmless, just a small misunderstanding that didn't need to be addressed. After all, wasn't this what marriage was about? Supporting each other through the storms? But what Natasha failed to see was how deeply Graham was settling into this false reality. Each time his mother praised him, he held his head a little higher. Each time his siblings admired him, his shoulders squared with confidence. He began believing his own lie, carrying himself as though he were truly the provider, the backbone of the household. When his siblings visited their home, they would look around in admiration. "Brother Graham, you really have taste. This house is beautiful. How much was this TV? It must have cost you a fortune." Natasha would sit quietly beside Graham, waiting for him to acknowledge her contribution, to tell them that she had bought it, that she had worked hard to afford their lifestyle. But Graham would only chuckle and say, you know I always provide the best." And just like that, he let them believe the lie. Natasha swallowed her words. She didn't want to embarrass him. She told herself that this was temporary, that once he got a new job, everything would be fine. But deep in her heart, a tiny flicker of doubt had begun to burn. Would Graham have ever done the same for her if the roles were reversed? If she was the one out of work, would he pretend he was the one providing just to preserve her dignity? Would he shield her from misplaced admiration the way she was shielding him now? She brushed away the thoughts, telling herself it didn't matter. She trusted her husband, and so she continued carrying the burden of their home silent, unseen, unappreciated. Little did she know the worst was yet to come. At first Graham had tried. He had truly put in the effort, sending out countless job applications, attending interviews that always ended with polite rejections, and hoping each week that an opportunity would finally come. But as the months dragged on, one rejection turned into 10, then 20, and before long he had lost count. At some point he simply stopped trying. It had started sadly, missing a day of job searching here, skipping an application there. Soon he had settled into a comfortably dangerous routine. Natasha would wake up early, prepare for work, and head to the office while Graham remained home, promising himself that he would resume his job hunt the next day. But the next day turned into the next week, and the next week turned into the next month. Natasha noticed, but she didn't say anything at first. She understood how difficult it must have been for him, how discouraging it was to try so hard and still meet disappointment. She reasoned that maybe he just needed some time to regroup, to regain his confidence. So she continued to carry the weight of their household alone. She paid the rent, she cleared the bills, she made sure there was food on the table. She ensured that Graham never had to feel the sharp sting of inadequacy. And she continued sending money to his mother and siblings every month, just as she had from the start. The problem was their demands didn't stay the same. It started with small requests. Mama needs a little extra this month to fix the leaking roof. Junior needs a new shoe. Natasha had always given without hesitation, but then came the bigger demands. Graham, your sister wants to start a cosmetics business in Ikunu. She needs capital. Your brother is looking for a new apartment, and he says his rent is almost due. Your mother's friend's son is getting married, and you know she cannot attend empty-handed. The first time Natasha hesitated, they turned to Graham instead. Your wife is controlling you, his mother had said over the phone. Ever since you got married, it's like you don't care about your family anymore. Is it her money? His sister had added bitterly. We're not asking for much, just a little support. Or has she made you forget that we are your blood? Graham had folded under their words. He had turned to Natasha that night, eyes filled with guilt, and begged her to just endure. Please, Natasha, it's just a phase. Mama doesn't mean any harm. You know how she is. But Graham, this is getting out of hand, Natasha had protested, her voice with frustration. I already do more than enough for them. I know, he had pleaded. I promise once I get a job I'll take over. But for now, please, just help them this once. Natasha had sighed and given in. But it wasn't just once. Every month the demands increased. Whenever Natasha refused, they would manipulate Graham, making him feel like a failure if he didn't provide. They made it seem as though his worth as a man was tied to how much he could give them. And Graham, he let them. Whenever his mother visited, she would scan Natasha from head to toe, eyes lingering on whatever dress or jewelry she wore, and then shake her head disapprovingly. "Look at you, dressed like a queen while my son works so hard to provide for you," she would mutter loud enough for Natasha to hear. "Do you even think about the sacrifices he makes? The things he does for this family?" Natasha had bitten her tongue, swallowing the bitter words that rose to the surface. She had wanted to scream to tell the woman that Graham did not provide anything, that it was her sweat, her money, her hard work that kept this household running. But she had stayed silent, and Graham, he said nothing. He would sit there, nodding softly, not agreeing but never correcting his mother either. And when his mother left, he would come to Natasha, speaking in that same guilt-ridden tone. "I'm sorry, love, you know how she is. Just ignore her." And because Natasha still loved him, because she still believed in him, she let it go. But they never stopped, not when they visited, not when they called. Not even at family gatherings where they would sing Graham's praises in front of everyone. "Our son, the one who never forgets his people. Graham, you are different. Some men get married and abandon their family, but you are a good son, a good brother." Natasha would sit there, her chest tightening, her fists clenching beneath the table, as she watched her husband bask in the admiration he did not deserve. And when she voiced her concerns, Graham always found a way to manipulate the situation. "Why are you so upset?" he would ask with feigned innocence. "They're my family, Natasha. They're just happy that I'm there for them. Is that such a bad thing?" "Graham, they're praising you for something you don't even do," she would argue. "Does it matter who does it?" he would say dismissively. "At the end of the day, we are a team, aren't we?" And just like that, Natasha would feel like the selfish one, the unreasonable one, the wife who did not want her husband's family to succeed. So she would sigh, bury her frustration deep inside, and continue to endure. But what Natasha did not realize was that this was not a phase. This was her new reality, and she was slowly drowning in it. The air in Okaru was thick with celebration. A few weeks before, Graham's mother, Madam Ibele, had called, her voice dripping with excitement, announcing that her birthday was coming up. "I want a proper celebration this year, Graham," she had declared. "Nothing too extravagant, just something that shows how much my son appreciates me." The request had been innocent on the surface, but Natasha could already see where it was going. She had watched the way Graham tensed, the way his fingers twitched against his phone. He had no money to sponsor such a thing, yet he didn't dare tell his mother the truth. Instead, when he ended the call, he turned to Natasha, his eyes already pleading before he even spoke. "Love, please, just this one time." She sighed, feeling the weight of yet another burden settling on her shoulders. "Graham, you know we can't afford this," she said carefully. "We have to be careful with spending." "I know," he admitted, rubbing his forehead, "but you don't understand. If I tell her I can't afford it, do you know how she'll look at me? She'll think I'm not a man. She'll think marriage has made me useless." Natasha looked at him stunned. Was that really what mattered to him? His pride, his image, not the reality of their financial situation? She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him to stand up for himself, to let his mother know that they had to cut back. But the desperation in his voice, the way his shoulders hunched forward like a man already defeated, made her hesitate. "Fine," she said finally, her voice tired, resigned. "I'll handle it," and handle it she did. She booked the hall. She paid for the caterers. She arranged for decorations and bought a beautiful gold-plated necklace and matching earrings as a gift. She did everything, down to the last detail. She even ensured the guests had enough to eat and drink. And yet, on the day of the celebration, as Madame Abeli stood in front of the crowd, she beamed with pride and raised her voice to say, my son Graham, you have truly honored me today." The guests clapped, their admiration evident in their eyes. "Not every son will do this for his mother," she continued. "Some men forget their family after marriage, but my Graham is different. He has given me everything I asked for. Look at this beautiful jewelry." She lifted the necklace Natasha had bought, the one Natasha had spent her own hard-earned money on. "This my son got for me," I raised a true man. Natasha sat in the crowd, her stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't the lack of recognition that pained her, it was the entitlement, the way not once had Madame Ibeli stopped to ask who really paid for all of this. She simply assumed it was her son because he was the man, the provider, the head of the family. And Graham, he sat there grinning, nodding along, soaking in every word of praise. He never once turned to acknowledge the woman who had made it all possible. Natasha felt a coldness spread through her chest as she watched the scene unfold. She had told herself over and over that this was temporary, that once Graham found a job, things would change, that he would reclaim his role, and she would no longer have to fill in the gaps of his failures. But sitting there watching him bask in false admiration, she saw the truth for the first time. This wasn't temporary, this wasn't a phase, this was her life. This was what she had signed up for, a husband who was comfortable being taken care of, a man who had no intention of standing up for himself or for her. As they drove home that night, the car was silent. Graham kept sneaking glances at her, guilt written all over his face. "Natasha, please don't be upset," he murmured finally. "You know I appreciate you." She said nothing, because words meant nothing anymore. That night she sat alone in their bedroom, staring at the ceiling, thoughts running wild in her mind. How long was she supposed to endure this? How long before they drained her completely, not just financially, but emotionally? She had given everything, and yet she had become invisible in her own marriage. For the first time since she met Graham, she allowed herself to consider a life without him. Natasha sat at the edge of their bed, staring at the bedroom wall in silence. The echoes of the previous night's celebration still lingered in her mind. Not the music, not the laughter, but the words. The false praises showered on Graham, the way he had sat there, reveling in admiration, knowing full well that he had done nothing to deserve it. She had told herself she would limit the spending. Enough was enough. She couldn't keep shouldering responsibilities that were not hers alone. For the next few weeks, she tried to put her foot down. When Graham's mother called again, her voice sweet yet expectant, Natasha had already braced herself. "Graham, my son, I need some assistance. The last money you sent helped, but things are still tight. You know how life is these days." Graham had turned to Natasha, his eyes pleading before he even spoke. "Babe, Mama needs help, just something small." Natasha had inhaled deeply before shaking her head. "I don't have it," she said, her tone firm. Graham blinked in surprise, as if the very idea of refusal was unthinkable. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice soft but insistent. "I mean I don't have it, Graham. Things are getting tight for me too." He exhaled, rubbing his palms together nervously. "Love, please, I know you're trying to cut back, but you know if I had a job, I wouldn't even bother you with this." Natasha remained silent, but Graham wasn't done. "You know I hate asking you for money. Do you think I enjoy this?" His voice was low, laced with guilt and self-pity. "I feel like a failure every time I have to come to you for help. But it's not my fault, Natasha. If things were different, if I had a job, you wouldn't even have to think twice. Please don't punish my family because of me." Natasha wanted to resist. She wanted to keep saying no. But the way he made himself sound like the victim, the way he positioned her as the one with power over their suffering, chipped away at her resolve. She sighed, and once again she gave in. It didn't stop there. The demands kept coming. Each time Natasha tried to step back, Graham would find a way to pull her back in. He never outright forced her, never shouted or demanded. Instead, he used gentle persuasion, guilt, and helplessness, painting himself as a man who had simply fallen on hard times. And she was the wife who was supposed to stand by him. But the financial strain was beginning to show. At work, Natasha was constantly stressed, always double-checking her accounts, ensuring she still had enough for their own bills. She had never struggled financially before, but now for the first time, she felt the weight of every naira leaving her account. Graham's mother, of course, never suspected a thing. If anything, she acted even more entitled. When she visited again, she took her usual critical stance, eyeing Natasha's outfit with thinly veiled disapproval. Natasha, you're always so focused on work, she mused, sipping tea in their living room. A woman should create space for her husband to provide. A home is happiest when a man is the one handling things, not the other way around. Natasha nearly choked on air. She gripped the edge of her chair, forcing herself to stay silent, knowing that if she spoke, she might say something she couldn't take back. But inside her, something was breaking. How dare this woman sit here talking about a man providing when her son contributed absolutely nothing? How dare she insinuate that Natasha was blocking Graham from being a provider, when all she had ever done was hold everything together while he sat back and enjoyed the comfort of her earnings. And Graham, he didn't correct his mother. He didn't say a word. He just sat there pretending not to hear, as if agreeing in silence. That night, Natasha lay awake in bed. Graham was already asleep beside her, his breath even and steady, unbothered by the turmoil raging in her mind. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about principle. This was about respect. If she didn't stop this now, Graham and his family would drain her completely. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't temporary. She needed to think. And she needed to think smart. Natasha woke up one morning with clarity. The weeks of sleepless nights, the endless arguments, the financial strain, it all came to a head, and she finally understood something crucial. If she didn't take control now, she would lose everything. So she made a decision. From that day forward, she stopped giving in. The next time Graham came to her, his voice soft with carefully practiced helplessness, she didn't let herself waver. "Babe, Mama called it again. She really needs some assistance this month." Natasha didn't even flinch. "Tell her you don't have any money," she said simply, folding her arms. Graham blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Natasha, come on, it's just something small." "You know I wouldn't be asking if—" "I don't have it, Graham," she interrupted, her tone firm. The air between them grew tense. She saw it, the slight flicker of panic in his eyes, the way his hands balled into fists at his sides. This was new territory for him. She had always given in before. Not this time. And just as she had predicted, the moment his mother realized the flow of money had stopped, she began complaining. "Graham, what is going on?" Madame Ebeli's voice pierced through the phone one evening as Natasha sat in the living room, pretending not to listen. "You've refused to send us money as usual like before. Is this Natasha's doing?" Natasha watched carefully as Graham's jaw clenched. He was angry, not at his mother. At her, but Natasha wasn't moved. She knew what this was. She had seen it coming the moment she stopped allowing herself to be manipulated. His mother's complaints, her calculated words, the way she made Graham feel like less of a man, this was a deliberate strategy. And it was working. Graham had stormed into their bedroom later that night, his frustration barely contained. "Natasha, what is wrong with you?" She sat on the bed calmly looking up at him. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," he snapped. "Why are you making things difficult? Why are you making my family suffer?" "Suffer?" she echoed, raising a brow. "Graham, I have done more for your family than you ever have." "And yet I am the bad person?" He dragged a hand down his face, pacing the room. "You're making me look bad, Natasha. My mother is starting to suspect something is wrong." Natasha almost laughed. "Oh, you mean she might finally realize that you don't have a job?" His head snapped toward her, his nostrils flaring. "Don't say it like that. Why not? It's the truth, isn't it?" There was a dangerous silence. Natasha took a deep breath and made up her mind. If Graham didn't want to tell his family the truth, she would. Over the next few days she made preparations. She called his mother, his siblings, even extended family members, inviting them to a small get-together at their home. She made it sound harmless, like a simple family gathering to reconnect and enjoy time together. Graham, oblivious to what was coming, was thrilled. "Babe, this is great. Finally you're trying to bond more with my family." Natasha smiled, if only he knew. Natasha sat on the edge of the bed that morning, her fingers interlocked, her heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. She had spent weeks thinking about this moment, analyzing every possibility, every outcome. She had debated with herself, was she being too harsh? Would this finally wake Graham up? Would his mother accept the truth, or would she twist it into another self-serving narrative? But no matter how many different ways she played it out in her head, there was only one conclusion. She had to do this, and she had to do it today. She got out of bed and moved with precision, making sure everything was set. She had already sent out invitations, letting Graham's mother and siblings know about the gathering. She had made sure to act normal, so Graham wouldn't suspect what was coming. The food was prepared, the drinks were set. The house was spotless. Graham, clueless and excited, walked into the living room, stretching. "Babe, you've really outdone yourself," he said with a grin. "This means a lot. You know, bringing family together like this, it's important." Natasha smiled. "Oh, I know," she replied smoothly, her tone neutral. Graham kissed her forehead and went to freshen up. If only he knew. By early afternoon, the house was buzzing with activity. Graham's mother, Madame Abel, walked in first, dressed in a rich flowing wrapper, her head tie styled to perfection. She carried herself with the air of a woman who believed she was owed this celebration. "Ah, my dear son," she greeted loudly, spreading her arms as she embraced Graham. His younger brother, Tobe, followed behind her, grinning, and his sister, Ada, waltzed in wearing a dress that Natasha had paid for. They settled in comfortably, chatting and laughing as though they owned the space. "Graham, my son, you are a true man," Madame Abel declared, settling into the couch. "Not every man remembers his family like you do. But you are a true son of the soil." The others nodded, echoing her praises, their admiration for Graham overflowing. Natasha sat quietly, watching them, listening. She let them talk. She let them heap false praises on Graham, let them continue their fantasy for just a little longer. Because soon, very soon, the truth would shatter their illusions. As the afternoon stretched on, Natasha stood up slowly, pushing her chair back. The soft scraping of the chair legs against the floor silenced the room. Graham, who had been laughing moments ago, turned to look at her. His smile faltered, because when his eyes met hers, he knew. His hands clenched at his sides, and she saw it, the silent plea in his gaze, the desperate, unspoken message begging her not to do this. But Natasha had nothing left to give him. She cleared her throat. "I have something to say." The energy in the room shifted instantly. Graham's mother leaned forward, curiosity evident on her face. "Of course, my daughter," she said sweetly. "Speak your mind." Natasha took a deep breath and let it all out. "For years I have sat quietly and endured. I have played the role of a good wife, a good daughter-in-law. But today I want to make one thing very clear. Graham is not the provider you all think he is." A heavy silence settled over the room. Graham's mother blinked, clearly confused. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that everything you have been praising him for, every single thing, was done by me." Graham flinched. His siblings shifted uncomfortably. "I have been the one paying the bills," Natasha continued, her voice steady. "I have been the one making sure there is food on the table. I have been the one sending you money every month, even though you thought it was Graham." She turned to look directly at Madame Abel. "The birthday party you were so proud of? I paid for it. The jewelry you are wearing, I bought it. And do you know what hurts the most? The fact that despite all of this, you never even acknowledged me." Madame Abel's jaw dropped slightly. She turned to Graham. "Is this true?" Graham swallowed hard, struggling to speak. I just recently lost my job, Ma," he stammered. "I was going to tell you." Natasha let out a bitter laugh. "Recently? Graham, you lost your job over a year ago. And instead of telling the truth, you let me carry the burden while you basked in false praises." She turned back to Madame Abeli. "And you, madam, have sat there criticizing me, calling me wasteful when it was my money funding your lifestyle. Do you know how insulting that is?" Madame Abelo opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her shock was evident, but Natasha didn't stop. She turned to Graham, her voice filled with something he had never heard before, finality. "I have had enough, Graham. I am done. I want a divorce." The room exploded. Gasps filled the space. "Natasha, please," Graham said, panic now replacing his arrogance. "Don't do this. We can fix this. I just need more time." But Natasha shook her head. "No, Graham. You don't need more time. You need a reality check." She pointed toward their bedroom. "Go inside, pack your things, and get you and your family out of my house." Graham froze. "Natasha, please, no." Her voice was like steel. "No more begging. No more lies. I'm done carrying a man who refuses to stand on his own feet. Tears welled in Graham's eyes, realization finally hitting him. His siblings looked at him with disappointment, as if they had never truly seen him before. Madame Ibel's face crumpled. "So this whole time?" she whispered. "Yes," Natasha said firmly. "And now I am free of all of you." She turned, walked to the door, and opened it wide. Graham, leave. And in that moment, as he stood there, lost and humiliated, he knew he had lost everything. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.